Well, so I'm not going to spend too much time covering this article, but I think it needs to be addressed nonetheless, purely because in some capacity it is effectively talking about myself, the same way it's talking about anybody else that's had the temerity to call out critical race theorists that are seemingly subverting Scottish academia, anybody that took to Twitter to call these people out, anybody that had the audacity to point out the questionable demographics of a school in Glasgow. This incorporates absolutely every single person, irrespective of how tame or how mean and nasty. Even though there was none of that, but let's play along with the narrative. Everybody seems to be tarred under the same brush here, and we're all white supremacists apparently. So this is from Tez magazine, which is effectively a sort of news outlet that's centred around teachers and academia in Scotland. And it says here that anti-racist education has been emboldened after white supremacist attacks. Well, it's not the first time I've been referred to as a white supremacist, but it's absolute nonsense. I can't speak for absolutely every single person that's took part in calling these people out or highlighting the odious nature of these people. But as far as I can tell, there wasn't really any white supremacists floating about the joints. But who's this from? Well, this is from Gail Gorman. Gail Gorman, of course, is the chief executive for Education Scotland. Education Scotland, of course, being the focal point of the Building Racial Literacy programme, which does get a mention in this article here. They're supposedly independent of government. Nah, they're not. Recent abhorrent online racist attacks have only increased determination to build racial literacy in Scottish schools, says Education Scotland boss. So right off the jump here, we start off with anti-racist education. Now naturally, when you hear the term anti-racist, this is a common mistake that many people seem to fall for. You hear the term anti-racist, it's just, you're merely opposing racism. But yet, you've just come down to the next paragraph and you're on about racial literacy. And this is where we start to really see what's going on here. So, what that really should say is people that were calling out critical race theory has emboldened your attempts to continue to push critical race theory. Where do you think the term racial literacy derives from? It doesn't derive from the fantasy of simply opposing racism. It stems from the literature, no pun intended with the term literacy, of course. It stems from all of the critical race theorists in America. And this mantra, this rhetoric, this ideology has been copy and pasted into Scotland, and it's got the backing of the government, it's got the backing of Education Scotland, and it's called Building Racial Literacy. Masqueraded, of course, under the banner of anti-racism. So, anyway, and I want you to contain yourself here because she's quite the cougar. Damn, girl. Recent white supremacist attacks on Scottish schools and educators have only served to strengthen the resolve that anti-racist education is vital and key to making the experiences of all pupils positive, according to the Chief Executive of Education Scotland. So again, right off the jump, this is the same rhetoric that they've been running with since this all came to blows to begin with. When the critical race theorists such as Melina, the other one, Nazut Utamani, Kajida Mohammed, to name a few, when they all started to private their Twitters, when they all claimed that they were being bombarded with abuse and racism, etc., when people were simply calling out their rhetoric, but they jumped straight to the defensive and insinuated that people were white supremacists, they were racist, they were being traumatized, victimized, etc., etc., bullied even, Then we had the speeches at the SNP conference, with the SNP members showing their disdain at the evil racists, despite the fact nothing that was said at any point was racist. Well, I suppose it could be deemed racist in the eyes of a critical race theorist because that's kind of the point. Even the term anti-racist defined racism. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole, you realise that these people are not simply opposing racism. No. They've redefined racism, and it's every facet of Scottish society and Scottish people as well. It's inbuilt, ingrained. So bear that in mind. It's worth taking notice of, These people are targeting our children. These people want to put policies and programmes into place specifically to target our children. Any pushback, irrespective of how tame it may be, is brandished as racist and white supremacy. Anyway, it only served to strengthen the resolve that anti-racist education is vital and key to making the experiences of all peoples positive. In an address today, Gail Gorman is expected to once again hit out at the abhorrent online racist attacks Scottish schools and educators have suffered in the past few months. They've suffered alleged, abhorrent, online racist attacks. No, they've not. They've absolutely not. I've made countless videos showcasing some of the screenshots that were put forth regarding people calling out the critical race theorists and their rhetoric. You know, it's absolutely okay for them to sit and talk about methods that can be put into place to try and brown or diversify our teaching workforce. But if somebody has the temerity to point out that in doing so you're simultaneously putting whites at a disadvantage, that's racist. This is what we're dealing with here. But this narrative is allowed to run unchecked, unchallenged even. Hyperbole even. And as a result, it allows them to continue to push on forward. They've got the sympathy from the media, the sympathy from the politicians, etc. When none of it is based in reality. It's deceptive, it's opportunistic, and above all else, it's pretty odious. Speaking about the professional learning offer for Scottish teachers at a conference in England this afternoon, Ms Gorman is expected to talk about the Scottish Government's Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme, launched following the murder of George Floyd and the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement. Oh yes, that's right, George Floyd died in America, then all of a sudden we have a programme put into place, which of course is where the critical race theory, building racial literacy programme stems from. Which I've already proved as well, before they scrapped it from their website. But get it up, you've got it. She will say that through this programme, teacher professional learning is becoming a tool in activism and a driver of real social change. Is that right? No, what's happening here is children are being propagandised and teachers are no longer teachers anymore. More and more as the generations roll on, teachers are not, well, they're teachers in name only, they're effectively activists. Teacher professional learning is becoming a tool in activism. Is that right? They're not meant to be there to be activists. They're meant to be there to be teaching children their ABCs, their arithmetic, you know, spelling, history, geography, biology, physics, PE, whatever it may be, not political issues. And early evidence reveals the strength of impact of the programme. What programme? What, the REREP programme? However, she's expected to add, but sadly, the reality is our professionals delivering this programme, and even our schools and our children, have faced abhorrent online abuse, or attacks, in the past few months. So, the reality is our professionals delivering this programme. You mean critical race theorists delivering a programme that's funded by the Scottish Government. Critical race theorists that have one agenda long term, and that is for every single teacher across the country to have critical race theory incorporated into their learning credentials. So when they're an up-and-coming teacher, they become a critical race theorist. People have the temerity to call out some of their odious claims and their odious nonsense on Twitter. That's somehow deemed racist. And as for the abhorrent abuse or attacks that have been directed at schools and children, again, didn't happen. People were simply pointing out the demographics of a school in Glasgow, considering Scotland has always been white. But yet here's a class full of BAMEs. That's all that was said. But even that is racist, because everybody can be Scottish. Therefore, if you have the temerity to point out something questionable about a photo, you're racist. Part of our role must be in protecting those delivering or participating in professional learning that might lead to discomfort for some and to racial trauma for others. Racial trauma. Oh, is that right? And these white supremacist attacks embolden us to continue this work and make the experiences of all children and young people a positive one in Scottish education. So, you just can't win, really. So, critical race theorists start to subvert our academia, start pushing for their ideology to become a commonplace. Normal people start to question it. They're deemed racist, they're deemed as white supremacists, etc. And because they had the temerity to call into question some of the nonsense that's been espoused by these people, that somehow justifies the continuation of the very program that led to the people questioning this nonsense to begin with. You just can't win. But again, it's predicated on the hyperbole, because they're insinuating, or she's insinuating, she's not the only one, obviously. They've all been doing this. They've been insinuating it's been a torrent of abuse and racism, etc., when it's been nothing of the kind. It's been people calling into question some of the nonsense that these people claim on a regular basis. And these white supremacist attacks and boldness to continue this work and make the experiences of all children and young people a positive one. How is that right? In September, education staff were subjected to the abuse following a presentation at the Scottish Learning Festival, organised by Education Scotland, which focused on the experiences of minority ethnic teachers in education and the need for increased diversity in the teaching profession. See this right here, though. See, they say it so matter-of-factly, and you're supposed to not really question any or look any further into that, right? All of the stuff that came out on this Padlet that was released, I made a video on it at the time. It was predicated again on looking at the world via the critical race theory framework, etc. But above all else, it was just constant whining and moaning about the fact that there's too many white teachers in Scotland, and then it was all about solutions and things that should be done in order to brown or diversify the teaching workforce, and then it was reasons as to why it's not brown enough yet, aka it's racist. So as I said at the beginning of the video, people started to question him and say, in order for you to put policies into place to prioritise brown and black teachers to diversify the teaching workforce, does that not mean by extension you are shafting whites or putting them, they're playing second fiddle? Some went as far as to say Scottish because Scottish people are white. Well, that's a no-no, that's racist. But the point is, though, that instead of defending their positions, they in turn jumped to the defensive and insinuated that each and every single person that had the temerity to call them out on their bullshit was in fact a racist. The need for increased diversity in the teaching workforce. Why? This is Scotland. This is the point. They're allowed to do this. They're allowed to say this openly. They're allowed to champion the possibility of getting things into place to brown our teaching workforce. And if you have the absolute audacity to question that in any capacity, you're a white supremacist. Material from the presentation was shared by some staff on Twitter, where they were subsequently sent the abuse. Again, no abuse. Put it this way, right? If there was genuinely abuse that was directed their way, we would never have heard the end of it. It's very easy to say that abuse was sent their way, but you just know, and this is where they fall short, you just know that if there was actually abuse for them to provide as proof, they would have. It would have been all over the media. Soon after, our primary school was subjected to online racist abuse. Again, prove it. Nothing at all was racist, nor was that abusive in any capacity. It was people simply, some poked fun, yeah. I suppose that's racist too now. But some made fun of the photo, light-hearted fun. Some just pointed out the obvious. That a school in Glasgow, a historically white city, and there's one white kid in the photo. But it's just a conspiracy to say that out loud, to suggest that there's a demographic change taking place. And then the laugh of it was, in order to defend the photograph, the likes of Nicola Sturgeon waddled on out with her gel bowl cut to brag about the fact she represents the most diverse constituency in Scotland. Therefore, proving the people right when they made fun or pointed out the obvious regarding the demographics of the photo. It's funny how that works. And then it says, Sturgeon was quick to condemn the vile racist. Oh yeah, so racist, for pointing out something that she herself admitted. She just went about it a different way. People pointed out on Twitter that the photo was very BAME, not very white, very strange. That's racist and vile and racist. But yet Sturgeon, in her attempts to defend the photo and lambast the people that that pointed out the demographics of the photo, she in turn pointed out the demographics of the photo by by bragging about the fact that she represents the most diverse constituency in Scotland. Well, kudos to you, Sturgeon. Maybe that gel's going to your fucking brain, because quite clearly didn't really compute what you did there. However, later she said racism always sickens her, unless it's against white men. But there is nothing that turns my stomach more than the idea of adults that can look at a photograph of beautiful, clever children and only see the colour of their skin, because they're all BAME. That's all that was being said. This is Scotland. The same thing, if the roles were reversed and there was a photograph of a school in India and they were all white, you'd be questioning what the fuck's going on there. She added, "It's despicable, it is disgusting, and it has no place in Scotland, and I hope all of us unite in our condemnation of vile racists everywhere." Define racist. Anyway, just to conclude, Miss Gorman also condemned the racist incidents at the time, saying Education Scotland would not tolerate such comments. Speaking to the University's Council for Education and Teachers Conference in Stratford-upon-Avon, she's expected to say that the attacks have done nothing to dampen efforts in Scotland to build teachers' anti-racist skills or increase their awareness of the impact of racism. And this right here. And who are they getting into to build the anti-racist skills for the teachers? Critical race theorists. Which brings us full circle. That's what's being called out, and that's unacceptable. A video played at the conference will say this means that educators don't avoid talking about race. Instead of ignoring racism, they feel confident challenging racism. Again, no, racism, define it. It's been redefined. Education Scotland's Building Racial Literacy programme, which is part of the Scottish Government's Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education programme, started in January and has been undertaken by over 80 educators. However, the programme falls short of calls in the past from campaigners for mandatory anti-racist education to support our leaders, teachers and young people to develop an anti-racist consciousness. And who do you think this is? I covered this article at the time, I believe. This is Kajida Mohammed. Where is it? I don't know if I'll be able to access this. Why must we wait for racial equity progress in schools? This followed the SNP's manifesto, where they first announced anti-racist education would become a thing. And Kajida Mohammed wasn't happy at the time. Oh, no, it was missing the critical edge, emphasis on critical. Well, hard times change, because behind the scenes, the Building Racial Literacy programme is doing absolutely everything Kajida fucking Mohammed could ever have wanted. And it's only a matter of time before this is commonplace for all teachers in Scotland. But just to conclude, just thought I'd cover that wee article there. You're a white supremacist if you notice things. It's funny how that works, but yet we're still the oppressors apparently. Fuck off.